Okay, since my first CGI movie still recreation was literally done on a frame from a John Wick spin-off, it should come as no surprise that I just love the whole franchise. So, considering that John Wick Ballerina will hit the cinemas in a few days, I jumped at the chance to recreate another scene from one of the main movies. Specifically, I decided to try my hand at this shot, knowing full well that if there is anything Blender absolutely excels at, it's calculating glass shaders, light refractions and caustics. And since I'm not one to shy away from a challenge, I took an approach that I knew I absolutely could pull off and went through it with full confidence and competence. Anyway, I compiled my reference board in PureRef, including my primary base picture as well as a few other perspectives of the same set, in the hope that they'd shed some light on the architectural details that were just too minuscule to really show up in the wide shot. I made sure to get at least one good view of every major material until I had a somewhat accurate understanding of the geometry of the whole room. Then I took the base frame into fspy and used the parallel lines of the glass display cases and the metal beams underneath the ceiling to get accurate camera data. Conveniently, the room also had pillars, so I could check in real time if the automatically calculated vertical axis of my scene lined up. I opened up Blender, imported my camera and started to match the positions of the big main focal elements in the room. Walls, floors, and of course all the showcases containing the transparent skulls. If there is one thing I've learned from my low-key scene recreation, it's to never start working on the details unless I'm absolutely sure my camera matches the reference image. That's something I'll never forget again. Then I started recreating the architecture of the set more closely, ceiling beams, metal columns and so on. I tried to stay in wireframe mode most of the time so I could check if everything lined up with the still frame. Using the mirror modifier was really helpful here, since the set turned out to be, for the most part, symmetrical. I subdivided the back wall of the room around the elevator door in the same manner I'd seen in this reference, and offset the edges on opposing sides to create the repeating pattern. I blocked out a rudimentary elevator cabin, and I added some walls on each side of the two parallel rows of display cases. After adding a few details like rivets and cables, it was time for a first look at the materials. I added a simple glossy material with a slight bump map distortion for the floor, and I found this material on Blenderkit. By the way, whenever you see me pulling some HDRI, material, model or other assets seemingly out of thin air, it's most likely I got it from Blenderkit using their phenomenal free Blender add-on. It just saves me so much time. I analyzed the extremely complex lighting setup inside of the elevator based off of the reference image, triangulated the position of the light sources and then deduced that it consisted of 2 lamps. Big ones. One left, one right. After changing the color to loosely match the one in the base image, I did the same with a much more muted emission embedded in this metal frame, and then started working on the display cases. I extruded the dimensions based on my reference, gave the glass walls some thickness and a slight bevel, and added the smaller pedestals inside of the showcase, as well as the little cylindrical stands that the skulls would rest on. I modeled a skull, psych, I just grabbed it right from Blenderkit and put it into one of the cases. Then the glass. Yep, was totally looking forward to that one. I slapped a pretty basic material onto the showcases so they'd not look completely weird, and I put an emissive material into the bottom to mimic the light sources from the film still. I also used the same material to add the glowing edges around the top of the case and the glass pedestal. You think that's noisy? You ain't seen nothing yet. I instanced the skull a few times and put one in each of the showcases, matching the tilt to the reference image as best as I could. I added an HDRI, tried some stuff with it, changed the color and just left it there for the time being. Since there was no way in hell that the skulls would pick up the light from the bottom of the display cases in a realistic way, I cheated and put small light sources into each of the skulls, mimicking the look of the original frame. Then I put some volumetric fog into each of the cases and used the color ramp to gradually fade its density out towards the top, to mimic a subtle light fall-off. After looking at some pictures of real skyscraper facades for a while, I decided to go with a tileable PBR map from ambientCG.com, which is where I get most of my materials from, as long as laziness doesn't magically move my cursor back to the Blenderkit search bar again. No! Bad brain! I put the texture of the nighttime skyscraper onto a plane and for a while did some unspeakable Cthulhuoid things to the shader node network in order to create a more randomized distribution of bright and dark windows. Then I wrapped the plane around the sides and back of my scene to somewhat mimic the adjacent buildings visible in the reference. At that point, my scene was still lacking a little depth, mainly because of those plant case thingies visible in the room behind the lateral glass walls. I used what limited reference imagery I had, grabbed a few assets from, you guessed it, Blenderkit, and mushed them together into some form of weird hybrid zombie plant until they just roughly matched the original. I distributed some red fruits around the top and lined the cases up with their positions in the still frame. Without another excuse to stall any further, all that was left was trying to match the light and colors, which in turn meant that I had to deal with the glass shader again. I spent half an hour looking at tutorials, trying different node setups, comparing render times and noise patterns, and then decided that I just used the extremely sophisticated trick of resolution overkill, so I wouldn't have to bother anymore. I just tried my best to recreate the lighting situation up to a certain point and moved on. I applied a dotted material to the far wall to match the surface pattern seen from this perspective. I also found an asset of a painting on that little obscure database that you probably never heard of before called Blenderkit, and then I punched a Voronoi texture node in the face repeatedly until it gave me this result, which was close enough to the painting behind John Wick in the elevator. Speaking of John Wick, since Keanu Reeves didn't reply to any of my emails asking him to let me 3D scan him for this project, I just had to make do with the next best replacement. This guy, who I took from the free sample pack on renderpeople.com. I knew he'd be pretty much just a silhouette and far away from the camera, so I didn't spend too much time on him. I darkened everything apart from the hands and face, pulled down his shirt in order to create the most vague resemblance of a suit jacket, and then put this low poly monstrosity onto his head to create the most vague resemblance of a dirty hair. After involuntarily making him dab for a second, I gave him a pose similar to the one John Wick has in the original frame, and gave him guns. Lots of guns. Well, at least one gun. I added a few invisible flecks to shape the light a little more, tweaked the colors one last time, and then hit render. I waited for the 10K image to clean up, then finally lost all hope and just slapped the denoiser on top of it, because that's why I made it so big in the first place. I did a final color matching pass in Krita, which I won't show here because it was really basic, and surely not because OBS managed to capture its own settings window instead of my Krita workspace, and finally I ended up with this. Yeah, I know. No need to tell me. I get it. I'm just that good. What is glass anyway? Whatever. Do you like it? Are you as excited for the Ballerina movie as I am? Do you want to join my top secret cult aiming to expose the shady dealings of glass as a whole? Let me know in the comments. Bye!